Hello YouTube. People have been asking me about my philosophy in regards to the craft, so I figured I would do a YouTube video to address this. Some of the stuff I've covered in other videos that I've posted here on YouTube. Some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about I haven't, so if you've heard a lot of the stuff before, bear with me. Some of you may not have heard it, so this is for you guys. But also I'm going to be going to some other things too. First off, let me say that I consider myself a traditional witch. And by a traditional witch, I mean a witch that practices the craft that goes further back than Joe Gardner, Alexander Sanders, Sybil Leek, or Buckland, or any of those guys. Now, that is not to say that I have any problems with the way they practice the craft. I've learned a lot from Joe Gardner. I learned a lot from Alexander Sanders, especially Alexander Sanders, because Sanders threw in a lot of high magic in his practice of the craft, and that's something that I do also. But I also draw on earlier practices within the craft. Someone like the Witch of Endor, she's always been someone who I've admired within the craft, because one of the reasons why I admire her is because she represents an older version of the craft that was interested in communicating with the dead, the craft that was interested in communicating with spirits, spirits of earth, air, fire, and water, spirits of the upper world, the middle world, and the underworld. So that is something that I've always been attuned to, and that is part of my practice of the craft. Now that's a little different than mainstream witchcraft or stuff that you see a lot of people talking about when they talk about the craft. But I still have a lot of beliefs that Gardner and uh, Alexander Sanders and Buckland have, but there are also beliefs that goes further back. One of the things that I like when I do my research in the craft is the fact that the craft was seen as a craft more so than a religion back in the olden days. It was called the craft. Well, I don't know if it was called the craft, but they viewed it as a craft because it was something that someone did. It was someone who was a shaman, someone who communicated with spirits, someone who communicated with the ancestors. Those were people who were a lot of times labeled as witches, labeled as the village healer. That's what my philosophy derives from, and that is what I'm really attuned to. The person that someone goes to for a tarot reading, that community service that a lot of magical practitioners do within their communities, to me, I view that as being really core within the craft as I practice. Now, that is not to say that everyone who is a shaman or who does magical things are witches, and that is not true. Um, but that is something that is definitely connected to the craft. Another thing that people have been asking me about is why I use so many dark images in my website and in my practice also. Number one, why do I set my altar in the west instead of setting it in the east or the north, as a lot of witches do? Why I use a symbol of Baphomet, and why I use the inverted pentagram and why I use the pentagram of the Necronomicon in my practice. Well, let me say this. The reason why I do those things is because aesthetically it's pleasing to me. I guess certain imagery doesn't appeal to everyone. I've always liked the symbol of Baphomet. I've always liked the dark imagery that that's associated with the occult. So that's why I use it. In the 1980s, there was seemed to be a movement to kind of get away from some of that because it scared certain people, which I didn't care. But I mean, that's cool if that's your thing. If you don't like to dress in black or use a lot of dark imagery, then more power to you. But myself, I tend to gravitate to that imagery, so that's why I use it. I set my altar in the west because the west is traditionally associated with water. It's associated with the spirits of the underworld, spirits of the dead. It's the best place for me to place my altar. Also, if you look in the back, you can see my altar. I have a skull on the altar, and the skull is the way. It's a symbol of how you communicate with the dead. It's a symbol of how you communicate um, with the underworld, of the spirits of earth, air, fire, and water. So that's why I use the imagery. Another reason why I use the Baphomet or the inverted pentagram is not because it's associated with evil or whatever. It is because it's Pythagorean, and Pythagoras used it. And when I first got interested into the craft, I got interested in the craft because it had to do with more of a philosophical thing for me. That's what attracted me to it more so than magic, because I always knew how to get a job. I always knew how, um, you know, to get a girlfriend or whatever, or get a new car or whatever. I didn't necessarily have to do magic for that. And people who use magic just for that, that is always kind of astonished me. It's like, do you really have to do magic to get a new car or get a better job or whatever? Haven't you heard of a resume? This is something that always kind of boggled my mind. But it was the philosophy that got me into the craft. And Pythagoras is one of the philosophers that I like. Pythagoras, I always like Epicurus, and those guys, Plato. Those are philosophers that I really liked. And Pythagoras used the inverted pentagram with his school. And the inverted pentagram, it meant perfection in nature, basically. Um, it represented the hidden force behind nature. It represented the golden mean. It represented perfection. And that's what it represents to me. Now, I also use the pentagram with the point going straight up, which of course means it stands for the elements earth, air, fire, water, and spirit on the top. But I use it going down too, because I like the dark imagery. And if you have a problem with the dark imagery, just go somewhere else. Don't watch my videos. Okay, well, I hope that clears up some things about my philosophy and how I view the craft. And I guess that's pretty much it. I'm going to do a part 2 of this video series. And until next time. Love is the law, and peace.